facilitators this evening. This is Audre Bedford Hansen and Jessi Hitchins. They both work at the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center at UNO. And they're here to talk about their work and how it intersects with some of the themes on gender, reproductive rights, and LGBTQI2S plus community issues as well. So, a round of applause.
So we don't have anything formal planned. We're just gonna we're gonna riff, if you will. Wow, I know Suzanne very well, and just the words that she was saying is like in opposite of who she is as a human being, and it was really intense. So, really, really impressive. So, what I also want to acknowledge is that I'm from a very small, rural, white sundown town. I don't think I've ever heard an intellectual discussion at that level in regards to conservatism or Catholic. I grew up in a Irish, Polish, and Italian town, so everyone was Catholic except for me. So I think that was an interesting discussion. So in regards to this, I think what was interesting is the idea that how easily the discussion to flip it, right? I have seen our students have very, very similar discussions with similar intensities to all the folks that were on this stage. And I appreciated that was something that was brought forward continuously, is that this juxtaposition is that these feelings and emotions exist on all sides. I would absolutely venomously oppose a lot of the things, and I have research to support that. And I think the conversation of having a good conversation, people struggle with. So I've been doing this work for over a decade in Alabama and Illinois, Florida, and here. I've been here 8 years. We started the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center upon my arrival, and it has since exploded. I think that I think one of the things that is pretty important in the discussion is the kindness that we allow people to have in building the knowledge that we might not have had access to. Because I grew up at a time when they, them was, I remember in 7th grade being like, that's a singular pronoun. And as I aged through my knowledge set, I remember writing my dissertation and using they, them pronouns as a singular pronoun set and having to still document that. And that was in 2017 as a special note. So I think that also giving people the kindness to have discussions is super duper critical, and those were not productive conversations. Those also happened when people were drinking as well. So I think allowing people to have productive conversations and continuously, because I think that was one thing that Teresa was struggling with, is that she didn't have that community, that she was led down a path. And I think that's complicated. So also Jessi and I use she, her pronouns. So those are some thoughts that I had from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of these communities that we belong to and how those inform very deeply held beliefs. We all come to different conclusions. Is it okay if I take my mask down to project a little bit more? Yeah. So, I saw a lot of my upbringing in this play. I grew up in a very rural part of New Mexico. My family has these kind of conversations, not as eloquently, but certainly under the influence of alcohol. And so I want to honor and acknowledge that coming from a faith background, I no longer belong to part of one. I think that the humanity is lost in people who have these perspectives, and it's just as this, it's lost on the other side, right? There's this lack of empathy and compassion for people with opposing viewpoints, because we've drawn such different conclusions based on our lived experience. And I think that's a big part of the work that we do at the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center is we provide training on campus. We have conversations. We had a conversation about healthy relationships. We had individuals join us from we're on a prison release program, and they were able to be a part of those conversations and interact with us. And I think, you know, the mission of our work is to filter it through an anti-oppression lens, but also to like unite the community in their experiences, to be respectful of different people with different perspectives, to find that commonality, because I think that's the beautiful, you know, aspect of higher education is it's not just a place where people come with one perspective or draw, you know, all the same conclusions. I really appreciated in the play they talked about, you know, that their experience in college was to lead the students to draw a similar conclusion. And that's not been my experience of college at all. You know, I think that we have very tough conversations. We learn from each other's experience, and I think that, you know, you're better for the conversation, you're better for the dialogue.
I think one of the things that I loved about this play was all of the theoretical references. I was like, this is like nerd central. What is not discussed, so it's a whole bunch of dead old white guys, right? And nothing from the last century have we ingested for the most part in this, from their ability to kind of understand desire as a theoretical framework, pleasure as a theoretical framework. And I think that those things, right, are part of the conversations of that are what is imbued in, I would say, the complexity, and the one character was talking about complexity and nuance that I think was missing, because they were very much thinking in black and white terms. And I will also say there's a lot of people who are on the left that think in black and white terms. There is a right way to move forward. There is only this one way. And I think that doesn't allow for the nuances of a lived experience to try to, and I think that that's what modern day theoretical frameworks allow for a more complex, nuanced discussion in that. From my perspective, also there's some women that's also included in that. Yeah, it was really brilliant to hear all those things. But once again, I don't think I've ever heard so many theorists in one discussion in regards to a conservative conversation, as both of us have grown up in a similar experience. Very different areas. I was in rural Illinois is very similar to rural Nebraska. Just the same as like rural anywhere. So yeah, it was very, very brilliant in that regard. And I think particularly for queer and trans folks, one thing that I want to have that conversation with folks like this is saying like, okay, like you're talking about the conversations that are happening in the text of the Bible. Who constructed the Bible? Let's have that conversation. What purpose was the Bible constructed for? It was political, right? Like, I think that we think it was a divine tone that just it began existing. And I remember when I sat in college, and I remember the conversation about in my history class about when that like became, and I was like, wait, what? This is not just divinely given to people? Like, hold on a second, I was not told this for all of my existence until now. And it was like, oh, I get it, right? And that made more sense. And that also allowed me, as a queer person, to also begin existing. So I think that that's also a place, because one of the things I was thinking is that the one character who was highly intoxicated, I was like, you are a queer person who is closeted. That's what's happening to you right now, from my perspective. I have very good gaydar. It's part of my job. It's part of your job.
Yep.
And so I was just like, that's the thing I think you're struggling with, is that like there's something in your body that you don't know what's going on. So yeah, and even just the idea of pleasure, like they weren't allowing their bodies to experience pleasure and what that means, and the restrictiveness associated with that. And I was just like, and there's, as also a Christian human, all of that is part of the divine. Like that's Jessi Hitchins' theoretical framework on that's not me as a scholar saying that, but that's how I understand it from my identity in relation to Christianity.
I really like that you're touching on this kind of weaponization of sexuality and within a faith tradition, how people negotiate. Does this distance me from the divine? Does this draw me closer? Part of my experience that I bring to my professional world is that I grew up in a very kind of charismatic evangelical environment. Purity culture was an enormous part of that experience. And so as I've grappled with my queer identity and tried to find the ways that those could mesh together, and ultimately for me they couldn't, and I had to distance myself from that. I think that's something that we see a lot of young people coming to QTS, coming to our.
What does QTS stand for?
Oh, so QTS is Queer and Trans Services. So I'm the Queer and Trans Coordinator, and we're part of the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center. And so we have a lot of people who have that same experience of feeling that they have to divorce their spirituality from their sexuality because there's no congruence, in certain interpretations of the Bible. And I think that, we see that we have some pastors who come to campus last week and we're again weaponizing sexuality, saying that trans individuals are not valid, they're confused, they're sexual deviants, they're immoral. And so I think that people carry that through the world, and I think it causes fear from both the left and the right. The play really has a dialogue about the idea of transgender identity being something that is new and is being negotiated by the left, and people who are of that identity know that they've been here for thousands of years, know that they are a valid part of the human experience, and that cultural war between the two. It takes up a lot of airspace, and it really does break down the connections in our community to people that we probably have more in common with than we would imagine. But political discourse is very polarizing.
I think one of the things that was brought up in the play that I think is very, very real is the idea that the conversation is being yelled at from all sides, right? The crux of the thing is that one side, there is a right side. There is a right side of history. One is the conversation of let me exist in my body and let me have humanity, which is what we do in our work when you're talking about what you're doing, like anti-oppression work, intersectional work. And what they were talking about is protecting something that is hyper-violent, right? And I think that's the terrifying thing. And so when our students, when I was, there's moments when I experience a lot of anger in trying to figure out how to communicate how my life is valid. Whiteness and cisgender and straightness, they're not experiencing joy. Like, come to our side and you will experience nothing but joy and love in your person, and you will also validate other people, and it doesn't hurt you or me, but you are hurting me. And I think that when the left yell back, there's this fear of like, you're telling me I'm wrong. Yes, and there's often, once again, a right way and a wrong way. I don't agree that and I don't believe that there is a right way to do activism and a right way to do advocacy. And I also understand the visceral anger that people experience when they're talking about people who are experiencing, they were talking about racism. And do you understand that they're going to scream in your face that you're a racist too? Yes, because they are trying to survive. And I think that that is so very visceral and real. And I think that that's why our people are sometimes really scared to have conversations with us because they think that we're going to yell at them. Because we also are protecting, like we hold these identities that we also like work for. And so there's sometimes that we have to swallow who we are to then do the work. There was a time, like one of the things that Audre first did when they were working for me was they were in a training that they were facilitating, and two of the people who were in the training viscerally disagreed with the content, and we had to be the cool and collected ones so we weren't the angry queers, similar to the conversation of the angry Black woman. Right? Not the same, but similar. So I think it was like we had to stay calm, we had to stay composed, but they were allowed to. So I think that that's also was built into that conversation that I thought was really very real and for safety reasons. That whiteness, no one has known in whiteness or cisness, so on and so forth.
There were so many identities that were being threatened throughout the play too. There's a person with a disability who folks interact with her, removing her agency or talking down to her or telling her how good and brave she is just for existing with a disability.
Yeah.
I thought that was incredible. That's something that the queer community is grappling with too, is wanting to be more inclusive, understanding that queer identity is it is comprised of the intersections of race, of sexuality, of your physical ability, mental health. I really was curious about the character who was experiencing being very drunk and upset. Well, also he's struggling with these things on the inside related to mental health, to wellness, to his own identity. I think the play touches on all of these things that make up who we are, and those identities as they intersect, that's also impacts the way that the world treats us and the privilege and the power that we have or the lack thereof.
A question?
Yeah, wait. So, I heard from a lot of people that, like, taking care of a trans foster child can be a lot. As a person who, is a foster parent of a trans child, can you attest to that?
Yes, a little bit off subject.
Sorry, I just walked in. So.
Yeah.
So both of our trans foster children are here. We're both foster parents of children who are the same age, who are also multiracial, who have a lot of identities probably that this play touched on and brought up issues related to that. We were excited that they were brave and stuck it out.
Yep. I have pretty thick skin when it comes to this sort of thing, so.
I don't, but I have a lot of love, and so that helps me to get through the things that are hard.
I just know how she's there to protect me, so.
Are there any questions or thoughts, things that came up for you? I think this was such a magnificent play. The acting was incredible. The care and the time that was put into all of the set design. I was just so grateful to be here and experience this. Is there anything that y'all would like to talk about?
Still trying to process it all. It was,
Right? Audre comes next to me and they were like, so where do you want to begin? I'm like, I don't know. I thought Barry might ask us questions, and I'm just like, there's a whole lot to unpack, which is pretty impressive and awesome. Like, it wasn't a one thing. It was so many.
I'd love to come back in about 48 hours and have this conversation again.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was surprised that the mother the perspective she brought to the table.
Yeah.
Whether that was wisdom and age and had lived through enough to kind of see the full circle of things, or
Sure.
or what. She brought a level-headedness that I did not anticipate up to that point
Yeah.
before the show had gone. So it was interesting.
Well, I think one of the things I liked about that character, well, one, she did get poked enough, so she was just like, I'm done, I'm out. I think that that's also important, is to know when this is not a productive conversation. So like, let me dip. I think that I see my dad in her a lot. He's not an intellectual man by any stretch of the imagination, but what he is a caring individual who has very deep empathy and has the ability to change and grow. And so as he had myself and my sister, I have a younger sister who's 35. He was a very staunch Republican growing up, and because of his daughter being queer, because our rights were being subjected to, and now he's like a card-carrying liberal, like out loud in a very small town, and it's weird. It is weird, but it's very much just like and it's about care. And so she was talking about care, right? And how those things can change over time. And he would probably sit in the same place as she is, because like there's some things that like he doesn't have the nuance to understand. She is a clearly intellectual character that was built, but like he just hasn't had the time and rhetoric. But when he spends time with something, if someone takes the time to engage with him in a meaningful way, he will listen. And I think that that's part of it too, is that like she's taking time to engage with stuff that I don't think that the other characters are really sitting. I think that's one of the cruxes of the conversation on all sides, is that the 30-second bites, the Twitter posts, like those types of things are what is moving the conversation, and it's not the deep, like at the top of the show is like, I want to have a deep conversation. None of these folks wanted to have a deep conversation. They wanted to yell at each other while intoxicated, not beneficial. But like in our office, we have deep intellectual conversations, right? And so I think that that is really, really important, and that everyone has value in that conversation.
I completely agree. I thought her character was a good foil to all of the chaos that was happening, but there was this moment like halfway through where I started to feel something that I experienced with whiteness, which is, we're being rude, let's not talk about this. Don't put me into a corner. I don't want to be approached too directly, and I think that's, and then at the very end, then she's lashing out, then she's slut shaming, then she's. And it was interesting because both people who had this kind of sexual misconduct were on stage, but it was the female. It was her that was isolated to the corner of the stage and attacked and belittled. And sometimes I do think that whiteness is that way. You push at it too much, and then there's an explosion, and then we cease to have a conversation. Because I think a big part of Midwestern and kind of white culture is that we don't want to be impolite. So sometimes we don't even talk about the deeper issues that impact folks. But I really enjoyed her character and how charismatic she was, and it reminded me of I went to a lot of religious camps growing up, and there was always someone who spoke so eloquently and with such passion and poise that I could believe anything that they said. But then the way that it flipped, I also think that happens in religious circles too. There's a moment where you've gone too far, you've poked into someone's faith, and then you're excluded. That happens to a lot of queer people. They can be, folks can be accepted for divorce or, going to prison or, a variety of things that we see as sin. But then sexuality and gender, that's too far. The church cannot encompass that. God's love is, won't supersede it. And so, I don't know, I thought that was kind of an interesting embodiment too.
Also, an important history lesson is that that the reason Mary is included in their conversation is because of the women's movement. She was absolutely resurrected in the church to specifically say, women, you're included too.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they've been regretting it ever since.
Well, they have a reason to say that you're included, also abortion is evil.
Mm.
So we include you, please join us in telling you what to do with your body. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
And she did that as well too. She basically had said you need to give yourself over to motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that expectation is, it's ever present, I think, for people who are female identified, but also as a queer person, I know a lot of trans students who are grappling with their womb, grappling with their secondary sex characteristics, things that they don't want. But there is that expectation that those are for nurturing and producing more children.
Yeah.
We're in a moment, I think, the environment was touched on a bit, we're in a moment where there's not enough resources, and yet we still have this impetus that women have to produce offspring, whether they choose to, whether that fulfills them in any way, because that's the expectation.
Well, thank you for staying. Thank you, Barry, for inviting us.
Thank you, Jessi. Thank you, Audre. Another round of applause. This was a fascinating.